Hello and welcome to my channel, and welcome to this week's Wednesday Interlude, in which I discuss my reading progress of the books I've been reading since last Wednesday, and in which I turn the spotlight on New Grub Street and George Gissing. This episode of Spotlight On is dedicated to my BookTube friend Roz of The Journey Through Books, who requested that I make one on this author. And if you enjoy these Spotlight on episodes and don't want to miss future episodes, be sure to subscribe and ring the notifications bell. But before that, I can confirm that I completed my reading of the third 20 chapters in Steve's read-along challenge of Phineas Redux, the fourth book in the parliamentary novels by Anthony Trollope. The highlights of this section include accusations of political corruption, in which Phineas Finn only manages to win his seat after investigation, but is debarred from office in the new Liberal government due to his supposed impropriety with Lady Laura Kennedy, who has left her husband. But the most startling development of all is when Finn is accused of murdering his rival and enemy, Mr. Bonteen, who has been coshed to death. There is some comic relief in a subplot involving Adelaide Palliser, whose two suitors are equally unsuitable, one for having no money and the other for flaunting his. At the same time, I've been reading the wonderful Eastland by Mrs. Henry Wood. You can see my spotlight on this book and Mrs. Henry Wood in the info cards above. In Eastland you can read about the beautiful but impoverished Lady Isabel, whose father dies and leaves her without any money and at the mercy of her hateful sister-in-law, who resents the fact that her husband has invited Isabel to live with them. The new Lady Mount Severn, as she is now called, resents Lady Isabel's youth, charm and beauty, and so makes her life a misery. You can read about the unrequited love of Barbara Hare, whose brother is accused of murder and is on the run. You will read about the successful young lawyer, Mr. Archibald Carlyle, who in an impetuous moment decides on an imprudent marriage. His wife is subjected to his overbearing and dominating sister, who insists on living with them and who intimidates her. There's a humorous chapter to enjoy called The Keepers of the Dead. You'll read about a secret love and a persistent lover, and all this takes place in book one. There are two more parts, this being a traditional Victorian three-decker novel, so there are more sensational plot developments to come. Now let us turn the spotlight on New Grub Street and George Gissing. To better understand New Grub Street, it is necessary to inform ourselves of what Grub Street means. Until the early 19th century, Grub Street was a street close to London's impoverished Moorfields district in the City of London, famous for its concentration of impoverished hack writers, aspiring poets and low-end publishers and booksellers. Grub Street existed on the margins of London's journalistic and literary scene. Along its length, Grub Street was dissected with narrow entrances to alleys and courtyards. Its bohemian society was set amidst the impoverished neighbourhood's low-rent flop houses, brothels and coffee houses. According to Samuel Johnson's dictionary, the term was originally the name of a street much inhabited by writers of small histories, dictionaries and temporary poems, whence any mean production is called Grub Street. Johnson himself had lived and worked on Grub Street early in his career. The street name no longer exists, but Grub Street has since become a pejorative term for impoverished hack writers and writings of low literary value. So with that understanding, we are now ready to appreciate the basis on which Gissing approached New Grub Street. New Grub Street presents a twilight world in which George portrays the grim reality of being a literary hack in late 19th century London. George took a pessimistic view of life, and it is evident in this stark yet compelling novel. You'll be swept up into the trials and tribulations of the literary hacks who toil in garrets, suffering the misery of genteel poverty as they fight to maintain their literary integrity against the dictates of the literary marketplace. The poverty, the hurt that failure and hardship bring, and the effect it has on their personalities and relationships makes for a vivid yet tragic and heartrending story. The heartache experienced by the writers portrayed in this novel, due to their feelings of wasting their talents on mean productions and being crushed beneath the ever-demanding requirement of churning out low-quality three-decker novels, will bring out your sympathies. It is not without some irony that New Grub Street itself is a three-decker novel, and Gissing worked within the constraints of that requirement, as did other novelists of the period. New Grub Street was Gissing's 9th novel, and is one that has stood the test of time. Many consider his novel The Odd Women to be his magnum opus, but I prefer New Grub Street, perhaps because it is about writers. Here is the opening of Chapter 1, A Man of His Day, which I think is delightful. As the Milvains sat down to breakfast, the clock of Wattleborough Parish Church struck 8. It was 2 miles away, but the strokes were borne very distinctly on the west wind this autumn morning. Jasper, listening before he cracked an egg, remarked with cheerfulness, "There's a man being hanged in London at this moment." "Surely it isn't necessary to let us know that," said his sister Maud coldly. "And in such a tone too," protested his sister Dora. "Who is it?" inquired Mrs. Milvain, looking at her somewhat pained forehead. "I don't know. It happened to catch my eye in the paper yesterday that someone was to be hanged at Newgate this morning. There's a certain satisfaction in reflecting that it is not oneself." "That's your selfish way of looking at things," said Maud. "Well," returned Jasper, "seeing that the fact came into my head, what better use could I make of it? I could curse the brutality of an age that sanctions such things, or I could grow doleful over the misery of the poor fellow. But those emotions would be as little profitable to others as to myself. It just so happened that I saw the thing in a light of consolation. Things are bad with me, but not so bad as that. I might be going out between Jack Ketch, the hangman, and the chaplain to be hanged. Instead of that, I'm eating a really fresh egg and very excellent buttered toast, with coffee as good as can be reasonably expected in this part of the world. Do try boiling the milk, mother." The tone in which I spoke was spontaneous. Being so, it needs no justification. George was born on the 22nd of November 1857 in Wakefield, Yorkshire, the eldest of 5 children. His father, Thomas, ran a chemist shop in Thompson's Yard, and the family lived behind the shop. His childhood home in Thompson's Yard, Wakefield, was acquired by the Wakefield Historical Society in 1978, and it now houses family memorabilia, exhibition material and books by and about George. Although he left Wakefield as a young man, his early experiences in Wakefield are often reflected in his writing. An exhibition called George Gissing, Fact into Fiction, is the title of that new exhibition at the Gissing Centre in Wakefield from the 4th of May until the 28th of September 2019. The novelist spent most of his brief life away from his hometown, but he returned from time to time to visit his family. Much of his fiction is strongly autobiographical, and it is therefore not surprising he used Wakefield in his work. Using a selection of pictures, maps and text, the exhibition examines how Gissing transformed Wakefield into fiction. George began his literary career when, at the age of 22, in July 1880, he sent his first novel, Workers in the Dawn, to Frederick Harrison, who sat up well past his bedtime, enthralled by its imaginative power and compelling story. However, because of the savagely realistic account of life in the slums of London, of prostitutes, thieves and debauchees, it was considered to be too improper for publication, and its literary merit was also questionable. And having been turned down by 4 or 5 publishers, George entered into a contract with another publisher in which he agreed to pay to have it published. It cost him £125, which was all he had left of his father's trust fund. It took several years before George became an established novelist, but in his short life he eventually wrote and published 23 novels, short stories and 2 studies of Charles Dickens, and is now regarded as one of the leading English novelists of his generation, enjoying friendships with fellow writers such as Henry James and H.G. Wells. Gissing died aged 46 on the 28th of December 1903 after catching a chill on an ill-advised winter walk. In this brief introduction, I can only hit some of the highlights, but if you'd like to learn more about George Gissing's colourful life, I refer you to the Biography by Jacob Korg, George Gissing, a Critical Biography, which was first published in 1963 by the University of Washington Press. Let me know in the comments below if after hearing the extract of New Grub Street you're not tempted to try reading this novel. If you are, I've put some links to free resources in the show notes below. There's an ebook and a recording of New Grub Street for you to enjoy. So that's all, folks. Don't remember to comment, subscribe, like and share, and I'll be back soon with another BookTube video.